right. Hello, hello. Thank you for joining me. Those of you watching on the replay, thank you for checking in to see what the RDRS is all about. I'm Dr. Lehman. I'm the principal at Westwood Charter. And I know that this was offered by the district to all parents in August and September. However, with the transition of principals, I wasn't confident that you all received that information. So this is the same slide deck that was shared from the district, and I'm sharing it with all of you just to make sure you have every opportunity to know and understand what the reading difficulties risk screener is, where it came from, why we're doing it, how it impacts your child, all of the things. So we'll go ahead. And again, if you're on the call and you have a question, please feel free to raise a hand. I'm happy to take questions live as well as in the chat. So objectives for today: understand what the reading difficulties risk screener, or we call it the RDRS, is and why and when it will be administered. Know what the results will mean and how schools will use the results. And just that we'll talk about what communication will be provided to families before and after administration. So why do we have this reading difficulty screener? Where did it come from? So EdCode signed this assessment, the need for this assessment, into law on July 10th, 2023. All schools in California across the state are now required to screen kinder, first, and second grade annually. So this will be every year. So if you have a kindergartner this year, they'll get the screening again in first and in second for the risk of reading difficulties beginning this school year. So we've been planning for the past 2 years since it was signed into law. So last May, the LUSD Board of Education selected M-Class DIBELS and Lectura. Lectura is for Spanish speakers or for our dual language Spanish programs. So basically, last year, all districts in California had to select an assessment that would be used for the RDRS, and there were a few companies that put in their bid that we could potentially choose from. They selected DIBELS because it was something our schools are already familiar with. So it's a state-approved reading difficulty screener. It is research-based, and it does have progress monitoring where we can track their learning over time. So for example, if they are showing a difficulty, we can provide some intervention supports and then continue periodically assessing them just to track their progress. DIBELS, if you've been around a little while, you may have known that name. It used to be our beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year interim assessment. It is no longer the interim assessment because we cannot have, it's a conflict of interest if we use it for the RDRS and for the interim assessment. So we now use iReady for all interim assessments, both reading and math, and DIBELS just for the reading difficulties risk screener. RDRS has to be administered in a language in which a student is sufficiently proficient. So M-Class DIBELS for all students who are proficient in English, M-Class Lectura for students sufficiently proficient in Spanish. There is an alternate process for student sufficiency, for students sufficiently proficient in a language other than Spanish and English. We have a teacher checklist, we have a parent survey, and then other historical assessment data that we can use in lieu of the DIBELS or Lectura assessments. So why and when? So why should we administer, or why are we administering other than the state says we have to? It also does give us insight into how best support student learning. So it gives us an opportunity to do early identification and intervention, improving literacy outcomes for students at risk. Screening all students early helps ensure strong outcomes and closing achievement gaps. So really, we're just trying to see if there's an issue early and provide early intervention, because sometimes that can prevent bigger intervention later, not to mention the amount of stress and frustration a student may be experiencing if they are having difficulties learning to read because they have specific needs that we may not be aware of yet. So this will hopefully make us more aware earlier so we can support them earlier. So when will it be given? So kinder through second grade students will take it one time per year. The district decides when to test, and then students, we don't want to test them first time they come in the school year because we want to have some opportunity for them to have some learning under their belt. So the district has chosen between November 3rd and December 19th. And so then, of course, each school will choose its assessment window within that November 3rd to December 19th period. And then if we have new students, let's say a student enrolls January 1st, we would assess them within 45 days of their enrollment to see how they're doing. There are exemptions. If you are feeling a little anxious or you're not interested in your child taking this assessment, they can be granted if the parent submits a written request, and we have a form for you to complete if you would like to exempt your child from this assessment. Ms. Michelli will have those forms. And then if they do move here and they have already taken the test in that school year, then you give us the results. We won't give them the assessment a second time. There's no reason to assess them a second time in the same school year. And then if the student's IEP indicates no assessment, if it's written into the IEP will on its own doesn't exclude this child from the assessment. They need the IEP, and the parent would need to fill out attachment E, parent exemption request. We need both things on file. Okay, so this is a little, they did a little check for understanding because we said a lot of things. So the RDRS is not required for students in TK. That is true. TK does not take this assessment. It begins in kinder. The RDRS will be administered 3 times a year. That is false. That's the interim assessment. So just 1 time per year for RDRS. Students with IEPs that say they do not need to take the assessment still need a written request to be exempted from taking the RDRS. That is true. And then all students take the RDRS in English. That is false. Again, if they speak Spanish, there is a Spanish form of the assessment. If they speak another language, then there is an alternative pathway for assessment for those students. Okay, how will we use these results? So we don't use these results to diagnose any type of learning disability or evaluate for disability. And that includes dyslexia. I think that's the one that parents are often most comes to mind when you think about reading. Results may not be used for high stakes purposes. So we can't use the RDRS assessment for gifted and talented identification for English learners to reclassify or to say that a student needs special education. So the results do identify students who may be at potential risk of having reading difficulties and benefit from extra support. So it's not quite at this level, this assessment. It's more looking at like first layer of interventions and supports that we can provide. So what happens if a pupil is identified as being at risk or having potential reading difficulties? So then we have to provide some type of support. And so it has to be an evidence-based literacy instruction that's focused on the student's specific needs. We do progress monitoring. Every 2 to 4 weeks, we reassess to track their growth over time or lack thereof, either way. And then early intervention in the regular general education program in the regular classroom. They may qualify for one-on-one or small group tutoring, and then also further evaluation or diagnostic assessment if we're not seeing improvement after we apply all of these other interventions and support. So how will you know all of this information? So today's webinar is one of those ways. We're kind of sharing the information with you. You'll also receive shortly a Home Connect letter explaining the assessment at least 15 days before we decide to do the assessment. Again, it'll be between November 3rd and winter break. And so we haven't selected a specific week yet for our school, but when we do, we will make sure that letter comes home for you. And then we'll also send home the results of the assessment, along with a cheat sheet or a guide, if you will, of how to read the results. And then if your child qualifies for additional assistance, you'll get a potential risk plan explaining what we're going to do to try to help your child improve or overcome the challenges they're experiencing. So thinking about how we're using, since you may have been familiar with Dibbles before. So kindergarten, this is how we're using this now. So for Dibbles, it's the RDRS requirement. It meets that requirement in kindergarten, just the regular Dibbles the way we've always given it. However, in first and second grade, they will do Dibbles, and we add the spelling assessment to what they were doing in Dibbles previously. And that meets the RDRS requirement. So it's very similar. If you've had previous children, the Dibbles is the same for kinder as it always was. First and second grade, we do the same, but we're adding that spelling component. And so here's a lot of information here. So it kind of goes through for kindergarten. What does that look like, especially if you've never heard of Dibbles before? They go through letter naming fluency. Are they able to name all the letters? Phoneme segmentation fluency. That's the sounds. Nonsense word fluency. If I put, S, U, and T, it's not a real word such, but can they sound it out because they still know the sounds of the letters? And then word reading fluency. Can they read words? How many words can they read in a minute accurately? And then when you get to first grade, you see we're doing the same things as kindergarten, but we added oral reading fluency, and they will do spelling. And then for second grade, we're not looking at letter naming, phoneme. We start at nonsense word. Then we add word reading. Then we do oral reading, and they do something called maze, which also measures their reading comprehension. Sometimes we'll find students are able to decode and read the words. They don't always know what it is that they're reading. We want to make sure they're comprehending what it is that they're reading. So what's the difference between last year and this year? So last year, everyone gave Dibbles 3 times a year. And then this year, they'll give the Dibbles, but also spelling to first and second grade. Last year, teachers were able to use how students did on M-Class or on Dibbles for reclassification. This year, they can only use iReady. So all students are now taking iReady 3 times a year for both math and language arts. And last year, teachers used Dibbles for progress monitoring and instructional recommendations, and they'll continue to do that this year for students that are flagged as at risk. So it won't be for all students, just those flagged as at risk on the screener. Okay. So the reading difficulties risk screener will be administered 1 time per year. It's going to be between November 3rd and December 18th or 16th. And then the interim assessment, the iReady, will still happen 3 times a year. So we've done it, the BOY, the beginning of the year already. You should have received a report or progress report from your child's teacher last week, telling how your child did on the beginning of the year assessment. If they did not connect with your child's teacher, they were printed and put in teachers' boxes last week. There are a lot of reasons for having both the RDRS and the interim assessments. Interim assessments are required by the state to check that all students, not just English learners, meet basic skills for reclassification. And then giving the interim assessment gives kids more than one chance to show their readiness for reclassification. RDRS is only a screener for early reading difficulties, cannot be used for high stakes decisions like reclassification. So you can see here, In the beginning of the year, August and September, all of our English language learners are taking their initial LPAC assessments. And then we don't have any students here in Westwood that are doing this grade 5 alternative science assessment. But here's the iReady is also being given at the same time as the LPAC. And then in the month of October, all those reports for iReady should have come home last week. If they haven't, again, please check with your teacher. And then after we've done all of our beginning of the year assessments, children and teachers have had time for almost 2.5 months to do some instruction. Then we give the screener so that we can see which students are still in need of additional support. Okay, anyone have any questions?
Okay.
I'm sorry if I missed this part, but how is the test administered?
So the Dibbles assessment for kinder is one-to-one. First grade, and second grade, there are some parts that one-to-one and some parts that are whole group or on their own. But it's online, except for the one-to-one part.
Okay, so yeah, Dibbles is the online system. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Good question. I don't think the slides went over that, so I think that was a good one. Okay, there's a question in the chat. Did the kinder kiddos have iReady for reading as well as math? They should have, yes.
Is there anything that we can do at home, like study plans to help them get better at reading?
To get better or for the screener?
Just in general.
In general?
Because my daughter's teacher said that she needs to continue to get better, and I can practice with her at home, but I don't have like, oh, read this 5-page book with these kind of words each night, or like something to do. So I'm kind of struggling if there was some kind of parent plan we could follow or something online that I could kind of follow without being a teacher and having materials and all that.
Yeah, you can definitely do additional iReady at home. They can log on and do iReady if you have access to that at home. If not, what grade is your child in? Kinder?
First.
Yeah, first?
Yeah.
You could go to any bookstore or even the Dollar Tree. They often have little workbooks in their coloring book section. There's flashcards there. You could do any of those things to help, but just reading together with your child, any book that she likes or he likes is really helpful. And making reading a fun and valued activity at home, it is very helpful. And then of course, ask the classroom teacher how you can support, like what letters are they working on? What sounds are they working on this week? And they can give you a list of words that you can be practicing at home that will support the instruction happening directly in the classroom that week.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Like somebody put in the chat, Lakeshore also has great resources to supplement literacy skills. They absolutely do. Lakeshore is like every teacher's candy store. But for parents too, for sure. Children's Book World on Pico is amazing with recommendations, and they have a huge selection. Thank you for that. Can you clarify? My understanding is the point of this assessment is to identify difficulties. Does it stratify beyond a student at risk for difficulties or not? Areas to practice or areas of high achievement? It does. And so you'll get that report sent home. So you'll be able to see which specific areas they were tested in and which areas they're showing a need in. And then once we've identified those students with a need, you'll also get a plan of action of how we're going to support your child here at school to try to help them improve. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay. These are great questions. Anyone else have a question?
You mentioned it's not used for a GATE or any kind of higher level achievement. Is there a GATE program at Westwood, and when does it start, and how are students selected for that?
Yeah, so gifted and talented, yes, they can identify starting second semester of kinder. If you want your child to be assessed for intellectual, high IQ, or starting in second grade, they all take the gifted LSAT assessment in the spring, and they can be identified that way for high achieving. So those are the two areas where it starts. And then as they get older, they can automatically identify if their grades and their test scores are consistently high. And that usually starts happening in 4th and 5th grade. Hopefully that helps. You are welcome, Brooke. Any other questions?
Yeah, is there a timing or timed component to the one-on-one? Like if a kid needs a little bit more help or gets nervous or distracted or like is having difficulty focusing, like do they have to do it with their teacher in a certain period of time, or will the teacher kind of help them?
There's not necessarily a time limit, but we don't want after so many times that they're struggling, we stop that part of the assessment and move on, because
Okay.
we don't want a child to feel defeated during the assessment and get frustrated. But that's also why we don't give it until November, because by then students typically know the expectations at school and they're a lot better. They're comfortable with their teacher. And that's why we also want to make sure their teacher gives the assessment so that we can get a pretty accurate read by then.
Okay, and sorry, just one more. You mentioned that it doesn't screen for like dyslexia or anything like that. Like, is there a mechanism either formally or informally for those types of screenings? Like if a teacher notices a kid is showing signs of certain difficulties like dyslexia, will that be brought to our attention?
Yes. So
Okay.
if a teacher's starting to see something like that, and this may start to show we haven't given this RDRS before, so we're all doing this for the first time this year. But even before this existed, if a teacher was seeing some signs of that, we would start kind of having a meeting with parents and the teacher and maybe our support staff and saying, let's start to think about a plan of support and see. First, we try some intervention things and see if the child responds. If they're still not really responding, then we escalate to the next level. It's kind of like when you go to the doctors, they might start you out with aspirin and move you on to different things, but they start low first, so we don't over treat a situation.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Once the gate assessments do take place, do teachers tailor instruction when and where possible? Yes, and I would encourage you to talk to your child's teacher to see how that's happening, but my guess would be differentiated instruction in the classroom. I've seen the icons of depth and complexity in the classrooms here. Again, I'm new, but I've definitely seen a lot of differentiation and rubrics in the classroom, and I'm imagining that's how they're supporting gifted students.
Sorry, and you said that the results from this test are not used for like gifted programs or diagnosis, and so why would parents request an exemption? I mean, what downside can it have?
As an educator, I don't see a downside, because all it can really do is provide us with information to more accurately work with your child. But there may be some other parents that have different perspectives or views. And so we have to honor that if they have those views and give an opportunity to opt out of the assessment. Okay. Any other questions? These are all great questions. Thank you everyone for hopping on during your lunch hour. And again, I will post this on the website, so anyone else who missed it, or if you wanted to go back and see the slides again, it is there. You can always email me with questions, and my email is my name. It's elizabeth.lehman@lausd.net, and we'll see you around campus. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.